The group we're going to talk about in this episode was formed in 1965 by two buddies who were in the high school choir and decided, hey, let's form a band. So they did, and they called it the Night Riders, but the Night Riders didn't go anywhere. So then they changed their name to the Crossfires, but that didn't click either. But they kept playing and added a few more members, and by gosh, they got a recording contract with a kind of obscure label called White Whale Records. And White Whale said, you guys need to change your name. So they did, and they became the Turtles. So here's the story. If you're ready to get happy together, then let's drop the needle. The group that called themselves the Turtles decided to change the spelling of their name because they were influenced by the British invasion and they wanted a piece of that action. So look at how they spelled it. Now, that didn't last very long, and they changed it the way everybody else would spell the word turtles. The group consisted of the two ex-high school choir boys, Howard Kalin and Mark Volman. They were then joined by Al Nickel, who played lead guitar, Jim Tucker on rhythm guitar, Don Murray on drums, and Chuck Potas on bass. But the breakthrough for the band came when they covered a song by Bob Dylan in 1965 called It Ain't Me, Babe, and it became a hit single. So naturally, an album came out, which was called It Ain't Me, Babe, to capitalize on that single. Besides the hit, they also covered Dylan's Love Minus Zero No Limit and Like a Rolling Stone, but I also like their versions of Eva Destruction and Let Me Be. Now, the Turtles might be thought of as a singles act, but their albums tell kind of an interesting story. In 1966, they had a hit with You Baby, and so they had to bring out an album called You Baby. Besides the hit, there are songs called I Know That You'll Be There and Paul Bearing World. Now, interestingly enough, there are no Bob Dylan covers on this album, and the album didn't sell very well. It didn't even chart. But that didn't stop the Turtles. They played some gigs, they played some TV shows, and then in 1967, they hit gold with a hit single called Happy Together, which became their signature song. And interestingly enough, Happy Together knocked the Beatles single, Penny Lane, out of the top #1 spot, and it became the Turtles' first and only #1 hit. So naturally, out comes an album called Happy Together. And besides the hit, the album contains another hit, She'd Rather Be With Me. Then there's a song called Like the Seasons, which was written by Warren Zevon, and Guide for the Married Man, which was the title of a movie that the Turtles appeared in. This was quickly followed by more hits, You Know What I Mean and She's My Girl. The Turtles continued to appear on TV shows, and in 1968 they decided to make a concept album, and it was called The Turtles Present the Battle of the Bands. And the idea here is an interesting concept. On the 12 songs that are on the album, it's as if there is a different band playing each of those songs, and the genres are different, so the songs sound totally different. And for the record, the Turtles actually adopted fake band names for each of the cuts. For instance, you get a fake band called the U.S. Teens featuring Raoul. They do the lead-off song, The Battle of the Bands, which happened to be co-written by Harry Nilsson. Then you get a group called the Atomic Enchilada performing The Last Thing I Remember. The next group up is the Crossfires, which was a nod to the early Turtles band name, performing Surfer Dan, and who can forget Chief Kamanawanalea and his Royal Macadamia Nuts doing the iconic I'm Chief Kamanawanalea. The album also includes 2 hit singles, Eleanor, and their last hit single, You Showed Me, which was written by Jim McGuinn and Gene Clark of the Byrds. It's an interesting concept, but the album didn't sell and it only hit 128 on the charts. Then in 1969, the band decides to get a new record producer, and they recruit Ray Davies of the Kinks to produce what will be their 5th and final studio album called Turtle Soup. There were 2 singles on the album called You Don't Have to Walk in the Sun and Love in the City. They didn't do real great. They failed to hit the top 40. Other songs include Come On Over, Bachelor Mother, and Dance This Dance. The album was a critical success. The reviews were great, but the public didn't really take to it. It stalled at 117 on the charts. By this time, the band was disintegrating, and their record label, White Whale, convinced Howard Kaylan and Mark Volman that they should fire the rest of the band and use session musicians. Now, this was pretty much a disaster, and by 1970, the Turtles had broken up, and as a result, White Whale Records went out of business. In 1970, a real mind-blowing thing happened. Kaylan and Volman and the bassist Jim Pons joined Frank Zappa, and they become part of the Mothers of Invention. Now, I can't think of anything weirder than Turtles becoming mothers, but they did. But there was a little twist. Kaylan and Volman could not even use their own names because of a contract stipulation. So when they joined Frank, they became the Fluorescent Leech and Eddie. They toured with Zappa and recorded many albums, including the great Live at the Fillmore East, which I've talked about, and the album where Frank Zappa actually called me on the radio to thank me for playing it. And they also appeared in the film 200 Motels. Besides being very busy with Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, Howard Kaylan and Mark Volman befriended another English rocker called Mark Bolan of T-Rex, and they recorded background vocals on two of his albums, Electric Warrior and The Slider. And if you'd like to know more about T-Rex, I did an earlier episode that you might want to check out. Later in 1980, they actually sang background vocals for Bruce Springsteen on his song Hungry Heart. In 1983, they reacquired the legal rights to the name The Turtles, and they went on tour with a bunch of sidemen from various groups. Through the 1980s and the 1990s, they had a bit of a resurgence in that Rhino Records started repackaging and re-releasing Turtles music. And then in 2010, the Turtles featuring Flo and Eddie went on tour as part of the 25th Happy Together anniversary tour. Howard Kaylan had some health issues. He had both back and heart surgery, so he decided to stop performing. But he did write a book, which I strongly recommend. It's called Shell Shocked: My Life with the Turtles, Flo and Eddie, Frank Zappa, etc. It's a pretty wild and crazy read. And Mark Volman wrote a book. It's called Happy Forever. And then Jim Pons, the bassist, also wrote a book, which is called Hardcore Love. Now, Mark Volman continues to tour with the band even today. For a band that never really got much respect, other than maybe Happy Together, over time, the Turtles have become pretty hip, and it's time to revisit their music. Now, as usual, I've created a Spotify playlist, and here is the link to that, so you can listen to some of the songs that I've talked about in this episode. I'll also put the link in the comments down below. So from two boys singing in a high school choir, to starting a surf band, to morphing into the misspelled Turtles, to then becoming the Turtles, then breaking up, then some of them going to join Frank Zappa, and then continuing on their own, it's been an incredible story. Hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep it rockin'. If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.